person said to me, never, ever say again that your testimony isn't dramatic. You were dead and now you're alive. I mean, I was a 7-year-old when that happened, but just that thought of, man, it's an unbelievable testimony. It may not be as dramatic in a book form or story form or in a film, but just the thought, the truth, the biblical truth that I was once a dead man, a dead boy, living under the weight of sin and shame. And then Christ came in, chose to bring life to me, and made me a brand new creation. So there's nothing boring at all about any Christian's testimony. Hello, my name is John, and I'm a pastor, and I'm in need of grace, or if you will, an imperfect human.
Okay, pastor. How long have you been a pastor?
So I've been in ministry for 33 years full-time. 10 of those was a student pastor, and then the last 22 of them as lead pastor.
Why did you become a pastor?
So I grew up in a pastor's home, which honestly didn't lead me to want to be a pastor as much as maybe want to do the exact opposite. I saw the costliness of being a pastor, the pressure of being a pastor, kind of that fishbowl existence of being a pastor. So there really wasn't a longing in me to be a pastor. Although I did have a very significant thing happen as a 7th grader at camp. I wasn't even expecting this at all, but one of the last nights of camp, as a teenager, 7th grader, camp pastor at the very end said, "Is there anybody here that might feel like God is calling them to be a minister, to be a pastor, to go like in a full-time ministry?" And he said, "And if so, like, would you stand?" And to date, I don't recall telling my legs to stand up. And it was a very surreal moment. It's like I looked around and people were kind of, I'm not sure, clapping or pointing or giving me a high five. And literally, Silas, I felt like the Lord stood me up in the best sense of that phrase. He caused me to stand. And so that was a really significant moment. As a 7th grade insecure young boy who wanted to fit in with everybody else, did not want to stand out in the crowd, and really probably wasn't that proud in public school of being a preacher's kid in town. And so a guy named Henry Blackaby would probably call that a spiritual marker. I can look back being a 7th grader and remembering that moment and even that location as well. Kind of interestingly enough for this video, I was back at that camp last week in New Mexico and went back into the auditorium. It's called the Aspen Auditorium at Glorieta, New Mexico. And I can't remember exactly what row I was at, chair, but I kind of remember back of the room. And just last week went back to that spot and kind of remembered. I mean, if I was 12 and I'm 56 now, like it was a pretty cool experience going back and just kind of thanking God for a call I didn't want to have or a call that I felt very insufficient to have. And honestly, still feel very insufficient for that calling to today.
You said that your dad was a pastor and you saw a lot of the inner workings of being a pastor, and so you didn't want to be a pastor. What did you see that discouraged you from wanting to be a pastor?
Yeah. I think some of it was, looking back, just do I have to have my act 100% together to be a pastor? Do I have to live in perfection to be a pastor? And even though that was nothing my dad would ever say, I think it was kind of just that, sense of awe for someone who was in the pulpit. Like, man, they must really have their act together. I remember very specifically one of the times that it caused me to roll my eyes and think, see, that's why I don't want to be a pastor. I was in high school at this point, and long before cell phones, Dad got a call on the landline during lunch on Sunday, and it was a lady who was mad at him, very upset actually, because of the width of the tie he wore that morning in the pulpit. I don't remember if it was like, it's too wide and that's not the style, or it was too narrow and that's not the style. But I remember my dad, wisely, didn't go into who it was and exactly, but I picked up in the context that he received a phone call on a Sunday to complain about the width of the tie that he wore at church that morning. And again, I mean, all these years later, like that stuck in my mind of like, yeah, that's reason number 550. I don't want to be a pastor. It's that fishbowl existence. Like everything you do is judged. Everything you do is evaluated. Everything you wear is evaluated. You know, how your marriage appears is evaluated. How your kids act, that's all, judged, evaluated, seen. And I did not want that for my life, for my future wife, for my future kids. And again, I think even growing up in a pretty conservative city, and even kind of a faith-based city, a lot of churches, a lot of kids involved in youth ministries, there was something that I did not want my Christian testimony or my Christian faith to stand out or to be seen. And I mean, my gosh, where else does it stand out more than like being a pastor or lead minister and being seen in the pulpit all the time or seen in public all the time? So those were some of the wrestling, some of the tensions that I felt.
Well, then what really changed? Obviously, you stood up in seventh grade, but was that one experience enough to make you be like, okay, I'll be a pastor?
No, it was a starting point without realizing it was a starting point, which I think God does often. Like he puts us in places we have no idea what he's doing to prepare. But I can always go back and quite literally physically did last week to a place where I realized, man, that's where all this kind of started, was maybe a sense without mystifying that situation. Like it was almost like God said, oh, whether you want to or not, this is what I've called you to do. Whether you want to or not, this is how I've created you. And I'm going to show that to you by whether you wanted to stand up or not, you will be standing up. And so it was kind of a mystical, supernatural sense that I had even then that probably spoke more symbolically to me than I realized. Whereas almost God saying, no, remember, I'm choosing you. I'm not asking you, is this what you want to do? Or is this your choosing of your own? This is something I've created you to do this. I also had to come to a place in my life where I realized God was calling me to be a minister, and it had zero to do with the fact that my dad was a minister or a pastor. Like those were two different callings, even though I saw the blessing is, the grace is, I have seen ministry in the life of my dad that's been consistent, grace-filled, steady, faithful. So that's the grace of the Lord. But I don't think God called me to be a pastor just because my dad was a pastor. And that was a wrestling, again, as a teenager. Am I just doing what I kind of know how, I know what to do? Or is this something that God has called me through? Not just as a teenager, even as a college student. That was the big wrestling of, do I want to do something else? Can I do something else? And am I doing this just because I've seen it? And I mean, and maybe a lot of people feel that occupationally. Like, should I be a mechanic because my dad was a mechanic? Should I sell homes because my dad sold homes? Should I be a teacher because my mom is a teacher? And so even kind of wrestling through that. And so it was really in college that, again, probably like a lot of us, one of the reasons I would imagine you love videography is because people throughout these past seasons have told you, man, you're really good at what you do. And I see this gift in you. I see this calling. And you kind of see the passion that you have, for that. And that's what happened as a college student for me. I would have an opportunity to lead a Bible study or lead a prayer group or go speak at an FCA. And people would start to speak into my life of saying things like, man, I understood what you were saying. Or there was a passion that was kind of lit in you that I've not seen before when you talked about a gospel that saves, a Jesus who came, a God who loves. And so for a lot of us, our occupation has been supported and spoken into by people that we trust and we love and friends. And so that's probably where all of our callings become solidified in a lot of ways, are people saying, man, you shined when you did that. Or I saw God's presence in you and on you when you were doing that task. And again, that can be teaching mathematics, making videos, or preaching from a pulpit.
Why do you think God chose you? You said in that moment, he stood you up, and whether you want to or not, like, I'm choosing you to do this. 56, 40 years, I don't know how many years you've been doing this. After all these years, why What have you landed on why God chose you to do this?
Yeah. I mean, I do want to say very clearly that like my God choosing me to be a pastor is on the exact same level as God choosing a Christian to be an electrician, or God choosing a young man to be a videographer, or God choosing a lady to be um, a mom at home. So I do want to make sure I say this very clearly that I don't feel like my calling as a pastor is any more special of a calling. Now, there may be more ripple effects to it, and scripturally it says that those who spiritually influence are held to a higher standard of judgment. So there are some differences maybe on that level, but as far as like specialness of calling, or I mean, I don't feel like the chosen one. Like I could turn this camera around and ask you the same question. Why do you think God chose you to be a part of video people's testimonies and lives? And so, I mean, I think, you know, looking back and looking to today in the present, I mean, God's given me a love for people. I love people, and that's what ministry is. You know, if you don't love people, please don't go into ministry. It's 99% of ministry. You know, I don't close the door of my office every day for 8 hours and just meditate, or, you know, just read God's word, which would be awesome. It's interaction with people. So I love people. I love being around people. I love encouraging people. I love the thought of helping people spiritually be everything that God's called them to be, everything God's created them to be. I mean, there's a deep satisfaction when I see the spiritual light bulb go off in people's minds of, oh, I need Jesus, or oh, his grace is sufficient, or here's a calling God has placed on me. Like those, it's just like playing golf, right? Like if you have one good hit, you'll go back to the golf course next week. It's the same in ministry. If I just see one of those light bulbs every couple of seasons of someone running home to the Lord, coming to know Christ, getting to baptize them, getting to pray with them, man, that's deeply satisfying. And so I think that probably is part of the, you know, the answer to your question, why did God choose me for this? You know, I think he knew that I love people, or maybe he knew that he had put a special love in my heart for people. Yeah. And then, man, I love teaching. You know, as you can tell by this video, I love talking. Like I don't mind at all taking what God has said to us in his word. In fact, I find great joy in it, and then teaching that or proclaiming that or helping to explain that to people who are ready to hear from the Lord.
Yeah. I want to talk to you now as a member of your church, a sheep, if you will, a black sheep, if you will. I look at you and I can't imagine that you like ever doing anything wrong. You ever like sinning, quote unquote. So, but every week you preach that we all are in need of grace. We're all in need of Christ. Can you share a little bit about how you need Jesus in your life? What has that looked like for you? Obviously, you don't have a story of total depravity, you know? Well, from a just visual sense.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. That's a great question. You know, part of being a preacher's kid is I learned pretty early how to do two things. One, mask sin, but also kind of live to please people. And again, there was never a time that my mom or dad lined my sister and I up and said, you better behave for the sake of my ministry, or you better behave for the sake of our evaluation from all these eyes every Sunday. But even without saying it, like even sweet people making sweet comments of, you know, even as a kid in Sunday school, you know, when the teacher asked a question, they'd always say, well, John, you must know the answer. You're the preacher's kid. And so it's just those little expectations that were kind of planted in my mind of, man, I better know all the answers. I better have my act together. And if I'm going to sin, I better learn how to hide it really well so it doesn't embarrass my family, my dad's name, the church's name. And even though I think some of those were some of them, ironically, maybe even come from a decent heart of saying, man, I want to honor my dad. I want to honor his position. but I think that those became tendencies in me that still to this date, I call myself a recovering people pleaser. And so just kind of learning to, um, to not worry or be as driven about my image management in front of people. Um, and so recovering, meaning I may never be over that until I see Jesus face to face. Maybe like a recovering alcoholic, there's always a tendency or a propensity to kind of go back to that old crutch. People pleasing would be that, for me. Um, the other end of that spectrum is, those who have had wild testimonies of, just years of vile debauchery. There's such a marked delineation when they come to know Christ. And it's almost like grace is this beautiful, unheard of water that just quenches the deepest part of that soul. And you can see it, like you can see the change in someone who has been, a Saul-like story of, man, just against God in every way. Christ comes in, grace enters in, there's a brand new creation. And I think sometimes, sometimes I do kind of long for, and I wish I would have had a great story to tell. Maybe I should have killed a few people and then had this incredible turnaround story, or have this horrible reputation around town as, as the wild, drunk 17-year-old. But I don't have, I just don't have that story, so I really can't make up that story. But the opposite effect of that is arrogance and pride. And the prodigal son story, we always celebrate the prodigal son. It's such a great, phenomenal story. The father's arms open wide, him running to meet his son who had gone to the far country and had thrown everything away. But I'm the older brother in that story. I'm the one that kind of gets jealous of the unbelievable amounts of grace that are sometimes given to people who've done horrendous, sinful things and very public. I should put it that way, very public sin, because that older brother in that story was a sinner in need of grace as well. It's just that he masked his pretty well. And his religiosity really began to show when it was like, wait a minute, I've been here the whole time. I have not left. And you're killing a fattened calf for a little brother who just took half of our money, half of your money, Dad, and has hurt our name and has just wandered off into the far land. And so when it comes to that story, I rarely relate to the prodigal son, and I sadly always relate to the older brother that kind of thinks he has his act together and he deserves the fatted calf for not leaving, as opposed to a fattened calf being slaughtered for a son that came home, that repented and came home. So that's, when people say, man, you don't have much of a testimony. Well, my testimony is arrogance. And my testimony is comparison of, it is easy for me, even though it's weird words to come out of my mouth. It's sometimes hidden in the back of my heart of, I haven't done what those people did. Do I deserve better or grace? Can I enjoy the grace that they're receiving? So that's the dark side of not having much of a testimony. And yet I do want to tell you a quick story, and I wish I remembered who it was. I was in Houston when I kind of made a side comment one time of, when I share my testimony, it's kind of boring. Like, a group of preachers' kid, group of people pleaser, got married, felt called in the ministry. Felt called in ministry, got married, have kids. And the person said to me, never, ever say again that your testimony isn't dramatic. You were dead and now you're alive. I was a 7-year-old when that happened, but just that thought of, man, it's an unbelievable testimony. It may not be as dramatic in a book form or story form or in a film, but just the thought, the truth, the biblical truth that I was once a dead man, a dead boy, living under the weight of sin and shame. And then Christ came in, chose to bring life to me and made me a brand new creation. So there's nothing boring at all about any Christian's testimony.
It's interesting. It kind of sounds like you're saying that in order to say that your testimony is not powerful, you have to have the assumption that you weren't that bad of a person.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to put it. I mean, isn't that what self-righteousness is? Is I can be righteous in my own good works, my own good story, my own good background. And I think that that's why probably a lot of people in my category of kind of walked a fairly narrow road, tried to make good choices as a middle school or high school or college student. Why they do, live very. I can see why. I'll put it this way: I can see why it's easy to live a self-righteous, almost a spiritually entitled life, unless you begin to really comprehend fully the righteousness that's being offered through Christ, the forgiveness that's being offered through Christ, but also the condition of my own heart without Christ. And whether it be, again, a public, wild debauchery of sin, or whether it be this really private wrestling with comparison and arrogance and pride and self-righteousness, really the condition of those hearts are the exact same, right? The heart is the same. It's just a different face. And it's that heart that needs a savior, needs redemption, needs rescue.
Yeah. That makes me think of the verse that says that man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, well, in the interest of relatability, you preach all the time about this gospel and how it's powerful and effective for every season, and you ask people to come to the altar and seek help and all of that. Do you ever feel like you need to do that?
Yeah. I mean, this sounds like a spiritual answer, but about every moment of every day. Yeah, I think probably the older I get, interestingly enough, even though I would say I'm more spiritually mature now than I was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I would also say I'm much more needful now of God's grace, needful of his presence, his power, like assurance, like almost like a little kid needs to be assured that his heavenly Father's promises are true, accurate, applicable. So yeah, and just maybe to answer your question, almost every Sunday, I would say 90% of Sundays after I preach and call people, would you love to come to kneel before the Lord, worship the Lord? I go back to a little place near the choir loft, the risers, and just get on my knees almost every Sunday. Some of that is in response to what the Lord has said to me through the sermon. So it's not as if it's just this external voice that I'm giving out to people. Here's what God's word says, thus saith the Lord, here's how to respond. But as I'm saying that, I just feel like the Lord is teaching me, talking to me, recalibrating my heart, often instructing me to live life in a different way, a new way. And so it's one of the reasons I don't preach and then kind of stand and lord over to see, who's going to make a decision today, who needs to kneel before the Lord. It's important to me to kind of go and bow down before the Lord. And so also is just in submission to what he has said to me through his word, not just said to the congregation, but how his word instructs me as well.
Was there a moment in your pastoral career where you could feel that arrogance, you could feel that like pride sneaking in, and God kind of humbled you?
Yeah, sure. Disciplined me. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've been in churches where seasons aren't great, and it's easy to kind of to bend your knee to the Lord and say, hey, God, I need you for power, for strength, for spiritual growth in this congregation. And it's interesting. I'm assuming this is life for everybody, but when times are difficult, you find yourself praying a lot more. When things are going pretty well, you find yourself kind of thinking, man, I can do this pretty well. by myself. I wonder if I could do this without God's help. I wonder if I could do this without bending my knee before the Lord. And that's usually, it's small little things like, yeah, I think you'll find this, think humor, since we're part of the same church family. It's like after someone else preaches, and I feel like I hear 50 people go, "That's the best sermon I've ever heard." Back in my mind, I'm like, I didn't preach it though. Just kind of that God reminded me of like, Durham, you're expendable. Like I don't need you for my kingdom. I don't need you for this church. And it's those types of it's those little things of him reminding me, hey, any good thing that happens that's come from my hand, it's not from your creativity or from your preaching prowess, or it's not your leadership skills. And so I love it when other people are encouraged and even praised in the church, because it's just a quick reminder to me of, oh, that's right, this thing isn't built on me. It's not because of me. And I'm an interim, right? I mean, I'm stepping in the pulpit for this season. I'm a pastor for this season. And unless Jesus comes back, the capital C church and even the local church that you and I are part of will be shepherded by a different pastor one of these days. And so my calling is to be faithful in that window, faithful while the church is on my clock, if you will, as the lead pastor. And so those are good reminders, when other people are encouraged or lifted up, or, and honestly, I kind of laugh about it now when people go, that was the best sermon I've ever heard. It's a reminder to me, that's right. Please, God, don't let it be about me.
Well, one of the things that I love about you, and I heard somebody else say this, um, this is actually really funny, but they said you were like, you're just nerdy enough to not be like this super cool looking pastor that like is trying to make it all about him. Um, but you're just cool enough to not just be kind of weird.
Yeah. I think I like that description.
But the reason why I love that is I do see a lot of pastors who pastor large congregations. As their ministry grows, it looks like they become more cool looking. They become more a part of society and what looks cool, and they have fancier clothes and chains around their necks and start wearing $300 pairs of shoes, and where maybe there's nothing wrong with wearing nicer clothes. Like we said, it's about the heart. I've often seen pastors, and I think a lot of people feel the same way, when pastors start to grow and they start to somehow have much bigger bank accounts and start to look flashier. Um, what are your thoughts on that as a pastor from your perspective of how do you not, I guess, how do we look
Yeah.
at it? How do we
Yeah.
as a church look
Sure,
at that?
sure. How do you not fall into that image management culture of like, oh man, I have more followers now. Do I need to look different? I have
Sure.
a bigger church now. Do I need to start talking differently? I mean, one, it's a natural human tendency and temptation that when you realize there's more eyes on you, you start becoming more conscientious of, how do I look? And will my image carry me further than my character? Or will my image be able to sustain me beyond being a flash in the pan for right now? And we're sold that bill of goods every day in American culture, right? Like, buy this so you'll look younger. Buy this so you'll look more powerful. Wear this, drive this, eat this, spray this on you, and this is the end result. Drink this. Think about every marketing campaign in our capitalistic nation is about, if you buy this, you'll be more loved. If you buy this, you'll be more powerful. If you buy this, you'll be more handsome, more beautiful. And so, I mean, that's for pastors, and that's for videographers, and that's for Baylor professors. And I mean, that's across the board. I do think it's unwise to become a wealthy pastor, because when you think about it, your entire platform is built upon a bloody cross and a homeless man being crucified and risen from the dead. And so when you start thinking, man, I need to drive the most beautiful sports car around and need to look really cool, and I need to triple my income, you have to remember the only thing that you're supposed to be preaching is Christ and Christ crucified, as Paul said. So even that thought kind of keeps me in my place on drive a Kia and wear $6 Target V-necks. I mean, I know V-necks have been out for about 5 years now. Some old navy blue jeans and some pretty dirty ons. I mean, if I remember that the entire reason for my existence as a proclaimer of the gospel is because of a man crucified, I don't know, man. It feels like it's easy to say I'll do with less than needing to do more. And if my image is forgotten for the sake of Christ's image being never forgotten, it feels like at age 56, it feels like an easier trade-off to me to go, I don't need all the stuff. But I get it when I was 26 and 36 and 46 of, man, I need to look the part, need to dress the part, need to act the part, need to drive the part. So I will say, I mean, I don't judge any pastor. I don't judge any pastor that's younger than I am that struggles with that and sometimes fails in that. I do judge pastors who are older than I am that fail in that. I'm like, man, you're old enough now to know this is not about you and your image, which, again, image management becomes idolatry really quickly. And that's not what the listeners, or if you will, social media followers need. They don't need one more person kind of propped up as awesome when if our gaze can be fixed instead on Christ, who really is, who truly is.
What should we look for in leaders to discern whether or not this person is worth following?
Yeah, it's a great question. Got a few words. Approachability is one of them. Like, can your leader be accessed? Does he speak and run off stage? Does someone else answer his emails for him, his social media posts for him, his text messages, him or her? So, approachability and accessibility, because you have no idea if without approachability and accessibility, you have no idea, like, what's really, like, how does he treat his wife? And do his kids love him, respect him? What did those, a good question I always ask is, what do people who are around him all the time really think of him? So approachability, accessibility, humility. Is there a sense of, this is about me, you better follow me? I do no wrong. I think it's just that humility aspect would be huge. And again, I don't think you see humility without accessibility. Like, it's hard. I mean, you can wear a humility mask and come across really, man, that guy's so humble. But if you can't be around him or her, how do you, really know? I think, no one knows a leader more than their family. And so watching how their family listens to him or her, enjoys being around him or her, I think that's a huge sign. And friendships, like, the coworkers and people around them genuinely like being around that person. Because if they're an isolationist, they're inaccessible, unapproachable, and their family and their kids are kind of super detached, then I think that those are some red flags of maybe something's different happening in the public persona than behind closed doors.
Based off of that kind of definition of leadership, would you say that you can't really have a true leader who is through social media. Like if you can't access them, they're not really your leader.
Yeah.
They're not really worth like following.
Sure. I think I might change that word from leader to shepherd. It'd be hard to say that person is a spiritual shepherd for me if you're geographically distanced from them, um, or they're completely inapproachable or inaccessible. I think, I mean, there's some incredible spiritual influencers and spiritual encouragers and spiritual informers and spiritual proclaimers, gospel proclaimers that you can listen to on social media, podcasts, YouTube. You can read, from ages past. But I do think that probably, again, the delineation is I'd be more hard pressed to say that's my shepherd. I think you can say that's a leader, an encourager, even an example. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, but when it comes, because I think biblically every Christian needs some shepherds. I think we could look to the New Testament and realize that there's no such animal as a Christian that doesn't belong to a local church and has some spiritual leadership over them. And for me, like I have spiritual leadership over me in the elders of our church. Like they see me, they speak into my life, they correct me, they set my salary. It's just so it's unbelievably spiritually healthy to have some shepherds. And so I think for probably especially the generation of college students, young adults, young marrieds, 20 something, 30 something, I think it's really important for them to find a local church where there's an accessible, approachable, humble shepherd that you could go to and go, hey, I'm struggling with this, or what do you think? And I will say in a larger church, that one sole lead pastor shepherd may or may not be the one that walks you through difficult times, but they should be able to say, but we have these people and this person and this group and these under shepherds and these leaders. I think that's one of the roles of kind of a lead pastor in a church or a lead elder, is making sure that everyone has a touch point of encouragement and spiritual leadership.
It's interesting. It's kind of just a side, but can you share a story of a time in your pastoral care where the elders had to correct you? And
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, which time? In a good way. Like I feel like they're great on feet. I mean, they're the present elders at Highland and the elders at Highland since I've been there have been unbelievable encouragers, but also they're not afraid to admonish, to say, hey, I think you should have said that differently, or you could have approached that differently. Or sometimes the admonishment is, we wish we would have known about this situation that you didn't tell us about. I don't think there's ever been a time they've accused me of hiding. I don't think they've ever like purposely hidden. It's just things slip my mind. Um, this may or may not make the video. We'll see. But like our last elder meeting, I got admonished for the way I answered an email. And when I went back and read that email, I was like, man, I should have been admonished tenfold from what they just said. You need to be careful with your words. Like when you're sending an email back to reply of someone who had a legitimate question, a legitimate concern, you need to be a little bit more pastoral. You need to be much more pastoral in some of your responses. And I love that. I mean, as a 20-something-year-old, I probably would have kicked back on that or pushed back. And now as a 56-year-old, I'm like, man, thank you for the feedback. You're right. I was wrong in that. So yeah, the elders don't mind at all calling me on the carpet. And
yeah, well, I think the reason why I even ask is I think it's far more often that we hear stories of pastors who um, had some major failing because they didn't have anybody checking them. And I think it's so good to hear of pastors that have people checking them, people over them, that they don't become this kind of tyrant that has all this power that can kind of do whatever they want. Um, and even the fact that you're here willing to sit down and share about your life for, an hour, kind of points to that accessibility. I think young people specifically are just craving honesty and boldness in removing all the masks and just saying things how they are. Like being, I think we're so tired of leaders who say one thing and do another. And I know from even a little bit of my own leadership roles how difficult it can be to be a leader. But it's essential. Tell me how you specifically guard your life from becoming one of those stories that we see another pastor did this terrible thing.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, there, but God's grace. I mean, I am fully capable of sin. I am fully capable of rebellion, fully capable of going off the rails, fully capable of being an adulterer, fully capable of sin that would be a disqualifying sin for ministry. So I think one, just realizing, man, if my flesh can do what my mind can think, I can do something this afternoon that would disqualify me from ministry forever. So just one, realizing that it's not just the temptation is there, the ability is there to choose sin and to choose rebellion. So that's a great starting point for me of never coming to a place where I think I'm above gross sin, or that I'm above falling this weekend, or I'm above, but also that I'm above feedback and leadership over me and spiritual authority over me. To never get to that place where I think I don't need authority over my life. I mean, that's a dangerous place to be. And yet my flesh says it all the time. If I want to be my own man, I can do this. I don't need feedback. I don't need authority. Cuss words in Christian world today is like discipline and accountability. Like, our flesh hates that. We hear those words all the time. And every time we hear the word discipline and accountability, our flesh kind of rises up a little bit like, don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what I need to do. Don't tell me what I can't do, which is really, right, going back to the original sin of God going, you can't eat of this tree. And immediately they eat of that tree, even though there was an abundance of other opportunities they had for nourishment, for health, for strength. It's, again, we carry on the sin of Adam and Eve in us of don't tell me what to do. So I think that's a good starting place in fighting sin, is realizing that I still struggle with sin. I'm still wrapped up in this filthy flesh until I see Christ face to face and he redeems me from this flesh. But also I think being willing to have a structure of a spiritual authority over me in the local church. I think that's really important. Having a wife that doesn't mind asking me tough questions. And then also, just on a daily basis, having staff that have full access to my office, my life, my heart, my thoughts. And so there's never, try my best for there never be this moment where it's just I'm isolating myself against spiritual authority, against my family, my wife specifically, and isolating myself away from my coworkers, my team that I get to work with. And so, an open door policy, there's no dumb questions, there's no bad questions, there's no out of bound questions. And then having some friendships as well, some brothers that I've known since college days that, ask me very point blank questions about pornography and about flirting and about any inappropriate words, inappropriate relationships. And even we'll dig deeper than that. Like, is there anything happening in your heart and your mind that maybe you wouldn't want to tell your family, your wife, even your authority and your teammates at work that you need to tell us about? And so those are all, important and helpful. And man, just try to fall on God's grace and call on God's strength as much as possible. We may have talked about this before, Silas. Like, I don't want to be that front page story in the newspaper. And primarily, I think I can say this with the pure heart, I don't want to dishonor the Lord, because I do know I'll still stand before him and give an account for my life. I mean, I don't want to dishonor my wife. I don't want to dishonor our church. Don't want to dishonor my kids, my grandkids. But I think ultimately, I don't want to dishonor the Lord. And I do know that there's a day that I will stand before Him and give an account, not of my sin, but of my life. And I don't ever stand before the elders on the last day, or don't stand before my wife or my kids or my friends on the last day, but do have to give a reckoning of the life that I lived in private, the life that I lived when no one else was watching, no one else was looking, and that really does that compels me to say no to ungodliness.
If you died tomorrow, what would you want people to say of you?
Yeah. Um, I would love. I've just been so drawn to that word of just he was, I mean, faithful, or showed great fidelity to the gospel, to the church, to Jesus. Showed great fidelity to Jennifer, to Hannah, to Caleb, the grandkids. Uh, Showed great fidelity to his friends, as in, I you know, I would almost hope there wouldn't be words like he did such a great job or he had this personality. I'd rather be known for just being steady and faithfulness to the things that were most important and not to the lesser things.
Hmm. Yeah. What makes you hold that faithfulness in such high regard?
I mean, I am absolutely convinced in the reality of a God. I'm absolutely, I mean, fully persuaded that that's what life is about the king and the kingdom. And as a fully persuaded person, I again, as I just said, I know that on that day of accounting, I want it to go well. And not that I would be cast away from his presence because of Christ in me, but I would love to hear from the Lord, well done. Like you were faithful. You were faithful to the important things. You were faithful to the eternal things. And I think that's what holds it for me. It's that compelling from Scripture that this life is not my own, that I've already been purchased by a price, and that I'll need to stand before the King and give him a review of how I lived with the gifts he gave me, the opportunities he gave me, the passions he gave me, skill sets, personality, all those things. If they're all gifts from the Lord, I do believe they are. Like, did I use those to honor my King?
I'm 31. Do you remember when you were 31?
So let me recall for a second. I kind of remember I was 31. I was wrapping up my last year of student ministry.
What would you tell your 31-year-old self?
Yeah. Um,
He's guaranteed to listen.
yeah, he's really close. I mean, I think I would tell my 31-year-old self, and don't neglect the simple, basic things, like the things that you've known since childhood. Like, talk to God, open your Word, love people well. Because I think somewhere in those 30s, you start thinking so much about your profession, your professionalism, your retirement, your money, your salary. I mean, that's kind of all that kind of starts kicking in. And I think all those things are unbelievably important, but I still think they're unbelievably lesser than this, the simplicity of John 17:3. And this is eternal life, that we may know you, the one true God, and your Son, Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. So just going back to the basics of, man, this whole thing is about knowing God. I know him through Scripture. I know him through talking with him, relating to the Lord. I know him through the community of believers around me. I know him through his creation. So kind of going back, and I think I tell myself, Durham, don't get too wrapped up in the really temporary things that you seem to find a lot of energy for. And would you keep pouring energy into the things that do last?
Uh, Last question. You get to send one tweet. You're going down on an airplane.
Yeah.
You have one tweet left. What does that tweet say?
Be really quick. Family, I love you. My family, I love you. And I think it'd say to my friends and whoever cares, it's worth loving God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I probably went over my characters for that, but that would be my tweet would be somewhere around there.
That's great. I love it. John, thanks for coming in, sharing. Thanks for being accessible.
Yeah.